I'm Alyson Dodd. I am an Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at Northumbria University, and I'm part of the SMaRteN leadership team.
I'm Becky. I am a PhD student at the University of Winchester. I am, in fact, part of the student team. So SMaRteN have a group of us who advise on some of the SMaRteN projects.
I think it goes without saying that the pandemic and all of the associated restrictions on our lives have had such a huge impact on everyone, and that obviously includes students, and there have been some very specific challenges that students have faced. We've had a lot of uncertainty. They've had to adapt really, really quickly to new ways of learning, to new ways of accessing the support they need. Everything really, including how they socialise. And then of course, as restrictions have eased, that has brought fresh challenges around readjusting as well, back to a bit more like how things felt before the pandemic, even though we are of course still very much in the pandemic.
I think, there's been so many different challenges, which is so individually based. I think different students will have different difficulties they've had to face over the past sort of 18 months. So we've got people who are mature students who have caring responsibilities, other students who were previously working part-time in perhaps the hospitality industry to bring in extra income to support their studies, and we know that they have been impacted economically. I think from a student perspective, that peer support you get from being on a campus setting brings so much to the university experience. So I know for me, kind of working from home, isolated, it's quite difficult to get the same connection and support from my peers. I think for particularly the students who commenced their studies during the pandemic, that must have been really difficult to make those initial connections.
I think for us our main focus was to keep up the momentum that we already had as a network, keeping our members connected, continuing to support the lead researchers on the projects that we'd funded. Some of them might have had to make necessary adjustments with their plans due to the pandemic and the restrictions, but we were really lucky in that many of our ongoing network activities were already being done virtually, so it was really valuable for people to have those sources throughout the pandemic with all the restrictions going on and so on. And we were still able to run some really successful virtual events as well. So our conference at the end of 2020 we did online, and I think actually the fact that it was free and it was virtual made it more widely accessible to people who perhaps wouldn't have been able to travel down.
Yeah, but I guess from sort of the student team's perspective, all our sort of initial meetings and our meetings since then have all been virtual, and actually it's been easier than I thought to kind of work as a team, because thankfully we've got the technology like Microsoft Teams where we can meet, there's emails. So although it would be nice to meet people face to face, I think actually practicality wise and financially wise, it's easier to do it from home when you've got a cup of tea and you're under a blanket, and then you can still take part in all the meetings. I came across SMaRteN via Twitter actually in 2019, and I applied for the student team then. I was very taken by sort of SMaRteN's approach to including students throughout the whole process. So it didn't feel like student involvement was a tokenism part of it. They actually meant what they said, and I was very lucky to get on the team for that year, but unfortunately personal circumstances meant I had to withdraw, and then I applied again in 2020, and I thankfully got a place again, so I felt very, very lucky to be given the opportunity.
We have run 3 funding calls. They've all been focused around the key questions that as a network we set out to investigate. Those were: what is distinctive about student mental health, and what are the factors that influence student mental health, and what can non-clinical universal approaches to supporting students achieve? So kind of moving away from kind of professional face-to-face, one-on-one type interventions to things that were a bit more aligned with the whole university approach that all students would maybe be able to draw on to support their mental health and well-being. Projects have included so many different things, from very arts-based and creative projects such as the first ever graphic novel and interactive digital tool that was about student mental health called Things in the Mind. We've had projects where students have developed short multimedia outputs after engaging with local literary, historical and film sources from archives. About mental health, we funded projects exploring how to support both undergraduate and postgraduate student transitions at university, peer-assisted learning approaches, and of course how we can improve induction for new students, both again undergraduate and postgraduate.
It's moving from doing to individuals and making assumptions about individuals to really making the individual at the centre. So I think so often research is based around an outcome that might be, for example, reducing student attrition within a particular course, and that's a very removed measure from the actual lived experience of the students. And at the end of the day, students are people, they matter as individuals, and I think they have so much expertise and experience that researchers can draw on. So I think firstly, sort of from a moral perspective, it's really important to include those that research is targeting within the whole process. But we also know that research that has a co-design element to it often is better, and it's more the outcomes are more sustained. And if you look at long-term follow-up, if you're looking for something like behaviour change from students, having them integrated the whole way through is a much better chance of that being firstly feasible within the student world and acceptable to the students themselves.
I think that a lot of researchers in the student mental health space will say, oh, in the past I've really struggled to get students to take part in my research, and I think the only way we can improve on things like that and actually getting sufficient student representation is if we speak to students themselves about, what are the priorities for student mental health research, and how can we get you to take part and tell us about your experiences in order to answer some of these important questions. With SMaRteN, co-creation, student involvement has been at the heart of our individual funded projects through our Plus funding, and at the heart of everything we do as an overall network. There's not much point in doing it unless it's important to the people who it's for.
There are so many advantages to the being part of both the local and the broader network, both in terms of making sure the research is achieving what we want it to, and being a researcher and going through that quite difficult process at times of trying to work in this quite difficult world. At the end of the day, a lot of researchers want to make a difference, and the best way we can do that is to work together, and I think that's where networks are so helpful.
Yeah, so definitely agree again. The point of a network is that it's a network, and it's supposed to be about making connections with people who are like-minded in many ways. So people weren't working just in their institution or with their usual collaborators in their silos, and we're getting out there and we're finding out a lot more about what others are doing that's relevant to what we're doing. And for me personally, it's really opened my eyes to a real range of fantastic work that's going on across the UK in relation to student mental health and wellbeing that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. And that's influenced me not only as a researcher in terms of shaping my ideas, knowing who to speak to, who might have shared interests, but also as a lecturer working in a university who wants to do the best for my students as well, knowing some of the initiatives that people who are part of the SMaRteN network are working on or have developed has allowed me to then introduce things in my own university to support student mental health and well-being, and I think that has got to be one of the best parts of the network. Learning about the value of keeping up connections and continuing to do all of the work that we were already doing towards supporting student mental health and well-being, albeit in a slightly different way. It would be easy to kind of be like, right, okay, there's a pandemic happening, so we can't do this and we can't do that because of restrictions, but I think we've adjusted and adapted and kept things going. And I think that knowing that we're able to continue on in the face of such extreme adversity for all, I think has been a huge learning curve.
Yeah, I think it's really highlighted the importance of student mental health. So I think actually it's about looking at what COVID has told us about the broader way that higher education functions and the role of students. And there is so much learning we can take from this really abnormal situation we all got literally thrown into overnight. And I think not only as humans, it's told us a lot about resilience and adaptability, but also about how we can improve the higher education system to ensure that students aren't negatively impacted by their education and actually go on to become really great contributors to the society we all want to work towards. So I think for me, a really key thing going forward is to look at how, both as someone who's advising people on their research and as a student and as a researcher, how I can make sure that I'm not accidentally excluding people, but I'm deliberately learning and ensuring I'm inclusive in everything I do, from my language through to the way that I approach co-design. So that's my aim for the next few years, I think, as a society, is to make sure that we are being truly inclusive.
I think that, as you were saying there is a tendency, I think, for individual researchers to feel like those systemic issues with lack of representation of certain groups are beyond them. And they say, oh, well, I can only deal with what I'm going to deal with now, and and I'm going to run my study and I can't change that. It's a bigger thing. But the thing is, we're all going to have to come together at some point and address that bigger thing and that bigger challenge, because you're right, the individual projects probably can't do that, but we need to do something to ensure that that's on the agenda and something that is improved over the coming years, definitely.